In Pennsylvania, right near the border into Delaware, there is a narrow, eerie place with deformed trees, closed-off paths, and lots of legends. It is formerly known as Devil's Road, the main attraction in a place called Satansville. It was written about in the book Weird Pennsylvania, which highlights the creepy places of the state. According to many rumors, there is a cult house hidden in the woods surrounding the road, and any trespassers on the road, especially those who stop, will be chased out with a black or white SUV or truck. For years I had read about the place and heard spine-chilling stories until I couldn't stop thinking about seeing it for myself. My friend Matt and I spent almost every Friday night at the mall together, as teenagers do. As expected, it can get pretty boring fast, especially with no money to actually have a motive to shop around for anything other than disappointment. Visiting Satansville without telling our parents became another weekly tradition of sorts, after he told me about his experience a month before our first visit. He had told me that when he visited with his guy friends, his phone service completely cut out, leaving them without Google Maps in a potentially dangerous, unclear area that was already scarcely mapped. Soon after he told me, a black truck came off of a dirt road and followed close behind them until they found the main road. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to be hooked. Not too much happened on our first few trips. We would see other cars rarely, as it's a hidden road that is no longer marked due to excessive theft of the street sign. Occasionally the cars would be black in color, and we would get a rush of adrenaline. It was fun, but not exactly terrifying, until one night. We finished up at the mall around 6, and we left with enough time to circle around once or twice with daylight, and the remainder of the time in the dark. It was about a 40-minute drive to Satansville from the mall, and I was tingling with excitement. According to the legends, cars that visit frequently are more likely to have experiences at this place, and this would be our third time visiting in the last few weeks. Instead of Matt and I going alone this time, we brought our friend Lola, who was very outgoing, and would likely have a sense of humor in a situation that we'd be too scared to continue in normally. We drove down the highway and finally made the first turn leading to seclusion. Matt and I had pinpointed several areas where we thought the cult house may be, but stopping on the road is illegal, so we never had a real chance to explore. At least, that's the logical reason I give, in lieu of us being major cowards. The ambience immediately changed as we entered Satansville, and the cool night air fled in through the cracked windows. In the first few turns, other people aren't entirely a rare sight. A few trucks pulling out of the driveway. However, the turn onto Devil's Road never loses its wow factor. The trees on the both sides of the narrow road lean away from the forest aggressively, not just a tilt, but completely bending in the trunk away from things we could only imagine. We were approaching the first major bend in the road, and a car was coming up towards us. It was a tight squeeze, nearly impossible for two opposing vehicles to pass. The presence of a car alone was enough to cause a twinge in my gut. Matt was focused on squeezing by while turning, and Lola was too busy cracking jokes to see what I saw, but I had never forgotten the face since then. I looked over to the white Jeep to my left, and the window was incredibly tinted, but half down. Looking back at me, straight into my eyes, like he'd been looking at me long before I looked at him, was a young man maybe about 25, with long blonde hair, a deathly pale face, and horribly thin fingers on the steering wheel. He was not at all focused on driving, as his eyes pierced me, and this is the worst part. His neck was completely turned towards me, while the rest of his body was completely straightforward. This may not sound creepy, but it was not normal to bend that way. He said something, but I couldn't hear him over Lola and Matt laughing at her antics. I couldn't break his gaze. I was stuck staring at him until finally, Matt passed the bend and he was gone. I kept checking the rearview windows, terrified with a feeling I'd never quite felt before. When I could no longer see the Jeep, though it felt as though he could still see me, I quietly asked my friends if they seen him. Neither of them had looked at him, nor felt anything unusual. I was pretty unsettled, yet excited to see what else would happen. We turned off of Devil's Road, but we are still in Satansville, preparing to loop back around, when we passed a little shack that always housed 2 black trucks. There was no sign of any other drivers, and we wanted to stir the pot a little. We stopped for a few moments and honked the horn, flashed our blinkers, and then kept driving. We also blasted Old Town Road for some reason, because that was our peak of comedy at the time. We looped back around and we were back on Devil's Road, when Matt stopped mid-sentence to adjust his mirror. In the darkening distance was a black truck. We giggled with nervous excitement and kept driving. It was exciting, but it kept a reasonable distance. I think we all kind of assumed it was a coincidence. That is until we turned off of Devil's Road once more and saw that there were no trucks parked by the shack anymore. We lost the truck when we turned on the main road to circle back around again. We circled around 2 more times, nervous but skeptical, and not much happened other than the white SUV that kept blinking its headlights. I'm not gonna lie, it did freak me out. And the return of 1 truck to the shack. And this is where it gets really intense. On our 5th loop, we were all very tense. The aura had changed to heavy, and it was completely dark at this point. Things had started to feel more ominous, probably from the slightly less passive actions taken towards us by whoever was there. We went down the bends, peering nervously into the woods. Some trees were marked with 666s and upside-down crosses, marks of other teenagers, and there was a distant light in the woods, courtesy of God knows what. As we turned off Devil's Road, but still in the heart of Satansville, headlights appeared behind us. It was impossible to tell what kind of car it was, as it was pitch black, and we had just turned the first major bend. Moments later, the truck appeared behind us, speeding. We were going about 25, and the truck must have floored it to catch up, and it drove uncomfortably close to us. I was the one to see it first. It was a black truck, windows tinted, and driver unknown. We drove on for a minute, freaking out, and turning completely behind us, like creepy Jeep guy, but more normal. Soon a second truck joined behind it at a fork in the road, and they revved their engines as if in communication. The truck sped up, nearly crashing into us, and we were forced to speed up. This continued through many intense twists and turns, where our car reached up to 70 at the maximum. They flashed their lights, kept speeding up and getting closer. At this point, we were losing our minds. They were definitely either going to run us off the road or catch us and do God knows what. They had these weird red lights on the top of their trucks, and the light was reflecting off of every window in our tiny Honda. Just above a small hill, the main road was visible, and relief flooded us. We panicked again, though, when we realized we have to wait for traffic to slow before we could turn, and they would definitely catch us. With nothing else to do, we stopped and glanced behind us, and the trucks were gone. We all expected a sudden ambush, but made the turn onto the highway and started home, talking about what had just happened. We came to the conclusion that the trucks had probably turned into a dirt road, only visible to those who know it's there, and that they were chasing us away from their activities like the rumors say. What were they doing exactly? We have no idea, and we had no intention of finding out, as we hadn't been back since. I still can't get the face and presence of the man in the Jeep out of my head, and this was over a year ago. I rarely tell this story for obvious reasons. I understand fully if you do not believe me. I respect your opinion. In 2006, when several of the buildings of the Intermountain Indian schools in Brigham, Utah were still up, several friends and I had gone up 3 or 4 times. The last time we went up, we were looking for a way into the catacombs from a different building than we had before. We tried the stairwells, but the doors were all nailed shut, and trying to break them open was loud. Very loud. Remembering that in the main hall there was a trap door in the floor, we decided to try there. It was a dead end. Basically just a tiny boiler room. My son's father and I were the first ones back up, while the others decided, hey, this is a great place to load a new bowl, because they were potheads. Anyways, we are looking around, shining our flashlights on random things, and we catch a glimpse of what we think is a person at the end of the hallway. We freeze, kind of think we're tripping. It's dark, we're slightly high, and if someone is here, it's probably more stupid kids or a homeless person. If it's a homeless person, we should probably leave. They're territorial, so they don't get caught and kicked out of the shelter. My son's father turns to holler down that we need to go, and our flashlight catches that thing again. I can see it clearly and hit his arm to get his attention. He turns and looks and freezes. So here's where we start to sound, well, crazy. This thing, yes, thing, was peeking around a wall at the end of the hall. It had maybe shoulder-length black hair that was, I was assuming, greasy, because it looked wet. In this moment, it looked like it was average height. Ever seen Pink Floyd's The Wall? Its face looked like the mask that the kids wore in Another Brick in the Wall. I'm chalking this detail up to the distance between us and it at this point. First friend behind us out of the boiler room is V. V is Navajo. Her and I have been very good friends since the 5th grade. I grew up hearing the many stories about how her grandfather double-crossed an accused skinwalker on the reservation in New Mexico, and how her family has been followed and messed with since, no matter where they have gone. Why we thought it would be a good idea to bring her with us is lost on me. Anything we did of this nature that included her or her sister always went creepily effing sideways, including Mount Olivet Cemetery in SLC 2 years ago. So V comes up and asks what the F we're looking at. We tell her we're not sure, because we have no freaking clue at this point. She looks down the hall. This thing gets freaking cocky, like it's arrogant. It straightens up and steps into the middle of the hallway. It's naked and tall. It would be even taller if it had normal legs. Not legs that bent backwards at the knees, like a horse. But now the other 5 people with us are out of the boiler room, and it screams, and it books it down the hall in the direction it came from. I've never seen people run so fast in my life. And the truth be told, I'm happy that the remaining buildings are gone. My family goes to Bear Lake every summer and had to drive by them. I had to make sure I had my Xanax or sleep for that part of the ride so I wouldn't have a panic attack. I'm currently a 22-year-old female, but this happened to me when I was around 10 years old. When I was 10, I was living with my mom and my older brother. He was 12 at the time, in a small bungalow. Nothing paranormal ever happened in this house, except for maybe this one occasion. I had one of those loft beds, sort of like a bunk bed, but without a bed at the bottom. Instead, there would be a desk or a couch underneath. I also had one of those doorway bead curtains hanging on my bedroom doorframe, so whenever somebody walked in or out of my room, you would distinctly hear the beads move around. This will be relevant later. My mom's room was right next to mine, but her door was perpendicular to mine, so I could see her entire door directly from my bed. My brother's room was in the basement at the time. Now, my mom only ever closes her door when she's inside her bedroom sleeping. If she gets up during the night to go to the washroom, her door stays open until she goes back in to go back to sleep. This will also be relevant later. Now for the story. One night I fell asleep and I woke up around 3 a.m. I remember being annoyed that I woke up because I often had a hard time going back to sleep once I woke up. I still had my earbuds in from when I was listening to music while falling asleep. I took them out, rolled them up neatly, and placed them on my little wall-mounted shelf beside my bed. The house was dead quiet, except for the low hum of a refrigerator a few rooms away. I was tossing and turning for a few minutes when I heard a loud bang come from either our kitchen or our living room. The first thing that popped in my mind was that it sounded like a large, heavy cardboard box that had fallen on the floor from a higher point, maybe from the kitchen counter or a table. I was extremely awake now and very alert. I sat up slightly, listening intently for another sound, hopefully sounds of waking from my mom or brother. Maybe my mom was in the kitchen getting some water and dropped something, but her bedroom door was closed, meaning she was in her bedroom, most likely asleep. Maybe it was my brother, but after a moment I didn't hear any other sounds, not even walking, which I would have heard because our house was very small. I decided that something must have fallen on its own, due to it being placed on an angle and it finally fell off its surface. I lay back down, facing away from my door, and attempt to go back to sleep. Not even a minute later, I hear my door beads move abruptly, as if somebody smacked them quickly. I jolt up and quickly look towards my bedroom door. There was nothing. My beads were motionless. I decide I must be losing my mind, and I'm just hearing things due to adrenaline. So once again I attempt to go back to sleep, this time facing my door out of paranoia. About 2 minutes later, I hear someone full out running in my basement. We were doing renovations in the basement at the time, so our basement floors were plywood subflooring, which were quite loud if you walked, let alone ran on them. My eyes shot wide open when I heard this. I sat up again, quietly, and listened closely for any other sounds. Then I hear somebody running in the basement for a second time. All I could think was, why in the world would my brother be running around in a basement at 3 a.m? My brother has Asperger's, and therefore behaves in a very specific and repetitive manner, and he never runs around, anywhere, let alone at 3 o'clock in the morning. I try to stay calm, and I try not to think of the worst, a break-in. I listened intently for several minutes. Because of the small size of our house and the plywood subflooring, I could hear if somebody was walking in the basement, but I heard nothing else. I wanted to call for my mom or run to her room, but I didn't dare move or make a sound. If it was an intruder, they most likely just wanted to steal some stuff, and I didn't want to give them any reason to come upstairs and potentially hurt my mom. She was a single mother with 2 young kids, with no means of protection. Self-defense weapons are illegal in my country. I laid back down. It took me several hours to finally fall back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, my mom's door was open, and I heard her and my brother talking in the kitchen, along with cartoons playing in the living room. I got up quickly and went straight to the kitchen to ask them if they heard anything strange last night. Both of them said they did not. I asked if either of them found anything on the kitchen or living room floor that might have fallen in the night. They both said no. I then asked if either of them got up during the night for any reason. Again, looking at me very strangely, they said no. I asked my brother, "So you weren't running around in the basement last night?" He looked at me in confusion and answered no. Neither my mom nor my brother have ever sleepwalked in their lives. My brother wasn't interested, and he went downstairs to play on his computer as usual. My mom was slightly concerned, so I told her what I heard the night before. We checked the front door, which was locked, and then checked all the windows, which were all closed, locked, and undamaged. I still have no idea what happened that night. No one in my family ever plays pranks, and I can't think of any reason why they would lose a good night's sleep just to scare me. Besides, I have no idea how they would have pulled it off, seeing as how I didn't hear any sounds of walking or anyone returning to their bedrooms at any point. And how would they have made the sound of my beads moving without ever actually moving them? I never found out what happened, but it still rattles my brain. First, a little backstory. I live in a small city in Oregon, right at the outskirts, which happens to be in the woods. It's very peaceful, actually. Most of my family is afraid to visit due to bears and other forest creatures invading my property. I've always told them how unreasonable that is, because I almost never get bears or raccoons. It's been nearly 3 months since I found a raccoon in my garbage. They still refuse to visit, and I don't know why. I'm starting to suspect it's really not at all the animals I never get, but something else. I started doing some research on what scary creatures lived in dense forests and in my area. All I could find were cryptids and creepypastas. I didn't understand how someone could be so freaked out over an urban legend. I brush it all off and just decide that they're simply not interested in visiting me. "Cassie!" I call for my dog. The sun would start setting soon, and I needed to get our walk in before it was too dark. She rushed in, her tail swinging happily. I clip her leash to the collar, grab some dog bags, and we head to the trail about half a mile away from the house. It's always been hers and my favorite spot to take walks. As I let my mind wander, I thought back to the creatures I learned about before, and one really stuck out to me. The Siren Head was its name. I pull out the article again and look at the fact sheet included. Around 38 to 43 feet in height. Some sightings rumored to be nearly 50. It read, it can mimic air raid, tornado, weather alert, and amber alert sirens. It can also mimic human speech, mostly the victim's loved ones. That sent a shiver down my spine. The thought of walking in the forest and hearing a familiar voice call to me was odd. I shake my head and sigh heavily. It's just to scare me. It's not real. I say aloud and keep reading, letting Cassie happily wander a ways ahead of me. It can stand still for days at a time while hunting. While sleeping, it sounds like white noise. And if agitated, the wires that are embedded into the tall, bony frame pulse, and the large speakers shout random words and phrases. It's a very interesting creature, but I couldn't understand how so many people thought this thing was real. It even explained it was art created by somebody named Trevor Henderson. I went over to his Instagram to discover just how many creatures he's really made. Smile Room, Cartoon Cat, Lil Nugget, Big Charlie, and Long Horse, just to name a few. He was very creative in writing backstories to caption the images. A clap of thunder brought me back to reality and Cassie whined. "Oh, I'm sorry. Come on, let's get you home." I turned to face the opposite direction and realized there was no path. Cassie must have led me off the trail while I was invested in the article. My heart starts beating rapidly. I never lose tales so easily. Lesson learned, Jen. Never get distracted on your phone in the forest. I tell myself as I turn the flashlight on to find the trail. The sun had begun to set and it was getting a lot darker. I decided to open up maps to see where I was, but service had cut out and I was at a loss. I thought tracing my steps back would help, as my dog I'm with was bred to be a hunter, but she was too scared of the thunder to help me. I was on my own for now. I start backtracking and eventually reach a small path. It wasn't too familiar, but I had a sense of direction and knew the opening was to the east, so I turned that way. As I began walking, I hear what sounds like rain falling onto the leaves of the top of the trees, but I didn't feel anything. "Sorry, Cassie, you might get a little wet when we get out of here," I say to my worried dog, who had her tail tucked between her legs and was very close to my feet. I keep walking, but the trail seemed to go on forever. Maybe I picked the wrong direction. I decide to turn around and go the opposite way. I'd never gotten so lost before. I was beginning to worry. I checked to see if I had gotten service back, but I was completely gone. All of a sudden it came back, and my phone buzzed quickly, a loud alert coming from it. Weather warning. That's not good. I need to get home. I dismiss the alert, but the alarm still sounds and my body gets cold. I look around my surroundings for any misshapen trees, but they all blend together. It was nearly impossible to tell where one tree ended and the other began. Crap! I curse and I pick up my pace, walking down the trail. The feeling of being watched never went away long after the alarm had stopped sounding. What feels like hours pass by and I find an exit. I cry out in relief and I step out, continuing to walk quickly back to my place. I suddenly jerked backwards by Cassie staying very still. "Cassie, come on, we need to go home." But she didn't budge. She just stared in horror and growled softly at a thin tree that looked long dead and had thin branches hanging down beside us. "Cassie, it's a tree. Calm down and let's go home." I bend down to pick her up and then I hear my husband's voice beside me. "Jen? Jen, where have you been? Thomas? Where are you?" I spin in a circle and I don't see him anywhere. His voice sounded close, yet distant. I then hear an echoey detail of it. and I got pale again. I stare at what I thought was a tree, but it was really the monster's legs. I researched. Thomas's voice speaks again, this time sounding farther away. "Come to me, Jen. You'll be safe." When I stay still, it begins to sound agitated. "Come on, Jen. You'll be safe. Come." I couldn't move. I was so shocked and horrified to discover that the reason no one visited was definitely real. Another weather alert sounds as I hear tree branches being snapped and tossed aside like toys. The creature stalked closer and didn't stop emitting the sirens at me. I finally come to my senses and I run, but this thing's long stride caused it to catch up easily. I was snatched up and the sirens grew louder until I couldn't hear myself think. As Cassie and I were raised all the way to its metal head, the sirens swiveled to face us. Even though I had no eyes, I could feel it seeing. Its frequency changed to a peaceful song as large, lipless, human-like teeth grew from the top siren, and a long snake-like tongue slithered out of its mouth. The tongue wrapped around my neck and brought me to its mouth. As I faced my last moments, I remember how I never got to say goodbye to my family, and they'll never find out what happened. I let tears fall, and I sob as the thing crunches down on my bones, now emitting my own cries of fear as I fall into the dark pit that I now knew as death.